So hey everybody, I'm Joe. I work for a company called MailChimp that's in town. A lot of people don't know that we're in Atlanta, but our headquarters is in Ponce City Market. We have about 1,000 employees there, and about 300 of that is the engineering department, and then I'm over about half of that group. And so I'm going to talk about my background a bit, college, a little bit before college. I did a whole bunch of different sorts of startups coming out of school. I'll talk about that a little bit, and then I'll talk about MailChimp. And what I'm planning to do is talk about the company itself, what it felt like when I started, and then what it feels like now that it's grown quite a bit. And I'm happy to answer questions. I can hang around as long as people would like. And if anyone after hearing about all this has questions about it or is curious about anything, I'm happy to connect later as well. I'm Joe at MailChimp.com. I've been there a long time, so I got the Joe. So I guess, background before I get into school. So my background, growing up, I had a very entrepreneurial family. My dad was a restaurant guy that did whole bunch of different chains, one-offs, some bars. And so grew up seeing him go through that, and he had ups and downs, but it was kind of fun to watch. And so as I was coming into school, that was kind of my my normal, right? Was the entrepreneurship route. I just assumed that's what I was going to do, and ended up at Georgia Tech doing computer science. Which was interesting. I always tell people that I'm glad I went there, but I didn't enjoy it at all. And that's kind of how it went. I learned a lot, and I did want to mention while I was there, so computer science was my major, but I tried to spend as much time as I could taking management and psychology classes. That's what I tended to use my elective credit for. And I feel like that made a pretty profound difference in what I was able to do when I graduated. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. A couple other things about school. I very much think you should view your classmates as a future professional network. I have connected with people I went to school with some of them are at MailChimp now. I started companies with some of them, reconnected with some of them at startups many years after graduating. And that's pretty valuable to do, is to try to make connections as you're working your way through. And then I spent a lot of time at career fairs, and so I wanted to mention these last two bullets. So the first is just trying to differentiate yourself through work, projects, activities. It's easier said than done, especially if you're working or doubling up, and it can be really tricky. But if you're able to come out of college and have something that can stand out on the resume when there's a lot of resumes that cover the same coursework and same project work, like a trip or studying abroad, or clubs that you've helped manage, or internships, things like that are great. But anything where if you're at a career fair and you're handing your resume to a recruiter, you can point at something that's different, makes a really big difference. And I'm always happy to give people tips on things that they could look at doing. And the other piece is just trying to get exposure to what's out there. Atlanta's full of, I'm sure a lot of you know, but there's all kinds of opportunities, companies of all types. Super high-tech companies, it's all over the place. And so it's worth trying to get a little bit of exposure to what's out there. You can do that I actually recommend people look at meetup.com and just find a couple meetups that are happening in the city and go to a couple of them and pick out some stuff that sounds interesting. There's sessions on absolutely everything, and you'd be surprised if you go to some of those at the companies that are in attendance. I go to them to try to find people to poach from other companies. And then, so that was Georgia Tech, and then I did a bunch of web startups. This was back in like the early 2000s, and so, which wasn't that long ago, but like Facebook didn't exist. So it was a totally different world. Cloud computing wasn't a thing. And had a bunch of different customers through that. And so through a few different startups, all kinds of clients. So we built some convention management software that It's actually still used by 2 conferences, and we use it to go to dinner once a year. It's pretty fun. I worked with a bunch of political campaigns at the presidential level. So we worked with the Giuliani campaign, a bunch of governors. That was pretty interesting and frustrating also. And then did a lot of work with bands, weirdly. So we had kind of one suite of software that we kept pivoting and selling it to different markets. And so went from political campaigns to bands and ended up having the Jonas Brothers as our big customer. And so I built a big social network for them, for their fans to use. And that was pretty fun because I'm completely out of touch with that sort of thing. There's a funny story at MailChimp where I got paged one night, and so there was a customer that was knocking us down. Like the people they were sending their newsletter to were clicking too fast. And I thought it was just like a bot or something, and it was Adele and selling tickets to a concert, and I didn't know who Adele was. And so I shut her account down and went back to bed. And I found out the next day, so like for weeks after that, people were like bringing me CDs, and it's pretty fun stuff. Same with the Jonas Brothers. I was like, I don't know who these guys are. But it's a lot of fun, learned a lot. That was a fun experience because that was back before cloud computing and a lot of the infrastructure options that we had today existed. And, going to the Jonas Brothers, their fans like really liked them. And so they would just meld our hardware, and we'd have to buy more servers, and it was super stressful. Learned a lot. And then we ended up selling the software into some big corporations. We had Chick-fil-A as a big customer. We used to power they do these like mother-son, father-daughter date night things in their stores, and that was using our software. Did nonprofits. We had the Atlanta Union Mission was probably the biggest one we worked with. And it was a really neat experience. And, I'll say all these startups died. I made about as much money to like buy a nice TV after 8-9 years of doing the startup thing. But I learned a ton, learned a whole lot. And so I tell people all the time, the startup thing there is some excitement around it because of the potential. There's the chance that financially it could end up being a big win. But if you just actually set all that aside, and if you're interested in this sort of thing and say, I just want to learn a lot really fast, it's a really good environment to do that because you have to do everything. And so in any case, I'm still pretty active with at least talking to startups. MailChimp has a kind of a fledgling corporate development arm, so I hang out at conferences, talking to companies, trying to do mentorship type things. So that's kind of the pluses and minuses to it. And then I took a diversion from web startups and worked at another company where I reconnected with some old classmates that did high performance computing type work, where we built the NVIDIA Tesla cards and the CUDA kernel stuff that they developed. So we wrote kernels to accelerate things like MATLAB that professors and researchers would use. And that was a lot of fun. It was a big shift. It was super technical, which I love. But it was strange because I was the only one that didn't have a PhD. Like everyone else in the company, all of our customers. And it was this strange dynamic of like I could write code better than any of them, but I couldn't understand what they wanted, like what they were talking about. So it was just like this strange, I'd be on Wikipedia trying to figure out enough to start writing the code. And so it was a lot of fun, but it was just not the right fit. And then, the startups sometimes do. We were about to be sued, about out of money, was about to have a kid, figured I should probably look around. And so that's when I ended up at MailChimp. And so I'm going to talk about, I already kind of mentioned it, what it was like when I started, what it is like today, and a little bit about, I pulled these slides out of a different deck where I go kind of real far into the technical stack, and so I won't go as far into the technical stack, and I'll talk more about the company, but I'm happy to answer questions about either one. So when I started at MailChimp, I was employee number 60. I was the 6th engineering hire. And I remember thinking it was just like a ridiculously large company, like uncomfortably corporate. They had an HR person, insurance, like reliable payroll. It was way too corporate for me. And I wasn't going to stay. I was just going to hang out there until I could find kind of the next startup to do. And it ended up being a great company to find, because even though, now I look at 60 and I'm like, that was super small. I was crazy to think that was big. But it was a lot of fun. And the kind of the mindset of the founders who are still there, the way the company's built, it's a super unique company, because we make more money than we spend, which is like super unusual now. We don't have any debt. We don't have any investors. We don't have a board. Private, totally self-funded, which is really unusual. And so we were able to kind of create an environment of autonomy and trust that felt like what I experienced at startups, but at a bigger scale. And then the other thing I liked about going into MailChimp at that time was we were very much the underdog. It was a much smaller company. Constant Contact, they're still around. They got bought at some point, but they were the big, they were many orders of magnitude bigger than us. And it was just a fun time. I remember our founders bought enough stock to be on their earnings calls, and they would listen to the earnings call, see the list of things they said they were going to ship, and then we would ship them the next week. And we would just do that over and over and over again. And then we started to actually time all of our releases leading up to the earnings call. And then we'd try to see how many times they mentioned MailChimp or got asked about MailChimp. And it was a lot of fun, super competitive. Now we're way bigger than them in every way. It was a lot of fun. And so, I mentioned when MailChimp when I joined, we were very much an underdog. And that's our company purpose as well, empower the underdog. So this is kind of what underlies everything we do and build at MailChimp. Our customer base is small businesses in the sense of 1 or 2 employees, right? Really small businesses. Salesforce defines a small business as up to 1,500 employees, which is crazy. So our definition is really different. Our whole customer base, we do have some big customers, but our customer base is hundreds of thousands of small companies paying us $20 to $30 a month. And it totally flips that, combined with kind of the financial background of the company, gives us a lot of neat flexibility with our product roadmap. And so the whole business is about empowering the underdog. And the customer segment that we serve is super risky. All the startups that I started died, and a lot of them do, most of them do. And so we're actually embracing a market where a super high level of churn is built in. And so it forces us to constantly innovate. We have to constantly add new channels, and we can make our purpose trying to impact that churn rate, right? So if someone can use MailChimp and have a little bit better chance of surviving, then that's what we're trying to do. And then this is our company mission, which is very much related. So we're all about democratizing cutting-edge marketing technology for small business. And what that means is we're actually not cutting edge in the products we offer. We intentionally sit back. We'd rather watch, a more enterprise-focused competitor spend a lot of time and money with account teams, sales teams, support teams, figuring out which cutting-edge tech ends up making a difference. And then we'll go steal that idea and productize it and build it differently so that we can sell it for free or cheap. And that's how we operate. So we hang back, we see what's working, we make it work better, and we sell it for really cheap. And then the company constants that have been the same since I started: customer focus, financial base I already talked about, autonomy and trust. I think I mentioned that already, but there's a really high level of trust between the departments that's pretty special, and it lets us move really fast and do interesting things. So one story, there's lots of stories I could tell about that, but one story I'll tell. When I started at MailChimp, we were all in managed hosting. We used a company called Software, Rackspace, Internap, and we actually kind of went the opposite direction of what everybody else was doing in 2012, 2013 and went full colo. So we pulled everything out of managed hosting, built our own environment, bought all the servers, hired a networking team. We did it for a lot of really good reasons. I'm happy to go long with anybody if they want to talk about that. But what's neat is MailChimp has such a low profile because we're private. We never raised money. No one had any idea what our revenue was. We had no credit because we never financed anything. And we didn't have a Dun & Bradstreet profile, which is tough to not have one of those if you want to go try to buy anything. And so we were trying to build out this colo environment and needed to buy like $2 million of gear. And no one would trust us enough to even extend like net 3 terms so that we could make that exchange. And so we would have been stuck pretty hard, but what's cool about MailChimp and the trust is, I told the founders and our CFO, I said, this is the direction we need to head. What if we just wired them the money without any, guarantee that this is going to work out? And they were cool with it. And so they sent us a quote, and we wired them $2 million and took all the risk. That's a big deal, and it freaked their accounting department out, and they still didn't want to do business with us because it was so weird. But then I could say, hey, you have our money. You have to send us servers. And we did that twice, and now they're still a vendor we use. And after the second time, they're like, we can do whatever. Net 30 is fine. But it's just a neat story. Like we did all that in like a day, and we're able to figure that out really quickly. And that would be tough to do at a lot of companies. And then our motto is listen hard, change fast. So always listening to the customer, always listening to our competitors and the market that we're in. But we want to be able to react to it and move quickly. So like the games we used to play with some of our competitors, and it's the way we build features and ship things and test things. As you get bigger, the change fast part, you have to kind of qualify it, like change fast but be smart, or change fast but don't forget about your teammates that will support the thing when it ships. But it still holds up pretty good, and it's good to have it kind of top of mind. And then the company constants are humility, creativity, and independence. And so these have not changed since I started. The humility piece is interesting because it can get turned around. Like I was just talking about how competitive we are, and we've had employees say, well, that doesn't seem very humble to try to destroy a competitor. And that's not what we mean by humility. It's the customer focused side. So we're not going to assume we know what's best for the customer or that the product is done. And that's what we mean by humility. So we're always asking for feedback. We do lots of customer visits, tons of data collection, user surveying, exit surveying, always learning how to make the product better. And when I started at MailChimp, we were sending about 20 million emails a day. And for those, I didn't even really talk about MailChimp the company, so a lot of people are probably familiar with it. We were an email marketing company for years and years, and now we're very much a marketing platform. We've built a lot of new channels now where you can send postcards, build landing pages, run Facebook ad campaigns, do Google retargeting. It's all built into MailChimp's platform now. We're really good at building product. We have not been great at telling people we built all that product, and that'll change. In 2019, it should be fun. You should see some commercials and ads and all kinds of neat stuff that we'll put out. But in any case, when I started, we were sending 20 million emails a day. That's a good bit. I remember thinking that was incredible because I had tried to build an email service provider as part of one of my startup's products. And we had dozens of servers. When I got there, it was still, we weren't really monitoring anything. We would find out about customer issues because our founder would email me a link to a tweet about something being broken. And that's about how sophisticated it was, which was okay. I think they made the right decisions to get to that point. That was one of the reasons they hired me, was to try to operationalize things and make things sturdy. And then I joined right after MailChimp made a shift to a freemium product where you could, at the time, you could have an account with up to 500 email addresses on your list for free. No credit card necessary. Now it's over the years we've bumped that number up. Now it's $2,000 for free, and that's a pretty neat thing for us. It's what's contributed to our growth. There's a lot of special sauce that we've built behind the scenes. It's why we have such a big data science team to police and manage that free plan, because we pick up 10 to 15,000 new accounts every day, right? And we can't hire people to keep an eye on all that, and that's all automated. So all the fraud detection, abuse, account shutdowns, and compliance, we've built systems for. And because we did all of that, we got into data science years and years ago, and none of our competitors have been able to figure out how to make a similar freemium offering, because when they do, they get overwhelmed with support tickets and fraud. And so in any case, when I started, they had just made that switch to freemium, and growth was starting to kind of 10x. So it was a fun time to join. And so now I wanted to talk a little bit about the engineering team at MailChimp, and it's not so much the technical aspects of it, but more the business mindset of the engineering department and why that makes it so different. And so this is our engineering mission statement, which doesn't necessarily sound like a engineering mission statement, but it's something that we built with our leadership in engineering. And what I really like about this statement is this is what we use for reviews and praising people and promoting people. Like, this is the mission statement that they must embody in their work. It doesn't really say anything about being, a 10x engineer or being super technical. It's the other words that are important. So working together, moving fast, being pragmatic, and being focused on the customer, which is in the first sentence. And so it's really neat that we did this. I like this statement a lot too because of the tension that's in it. If you pull pieces of it out, it falls apart. Momentum can have a lot of negative connotations in engineering around death marches and working lots of hours. But we have these other pieces in here, pragmatism and production ready, that prevent it from becoming a bad thing. And so I think this is pretty cool. Not a lot of companies try to think about, tools and frameworks for their engineering teams beyond what languages and tech that they're going to use. And then this is our philosophy. And, again, it's all business, right? There's nothing in here about tech hardly. And the top two are the most important. We're supporting the company. And the reason I wanted to talk through all this is just to emphasize, I think, why MailChimp and MailChimp's engineering department has been successful. It's been because of this and the focus on the company. If you get bogged down in, the second piece of the philosophy is business first, not tool first, right? So we're doing engineering for the benefit of the company to serve our customers, not to play around and tinker with things. I tease, I don't know if people are familiar with Hacker News. It's like a online forum thing around the Y Combinator incubator out in California. And it's neat if you want to get a pulse on what's happening in tech. But I tell our people when they start, I was like, don't read that page. If you go read that page and pick a few words that you just read about and try to build something with that stack, I'll be super unhappy. And you need to do it our way. And you need to worry about I'd rather people innovate on how we're providing value to the business than to innovate on, hey, I just found this language that was created 3 days ago and it looks cool, so I'm going to build something with it. And we try to be really upfront about this. And when we're recruiting, it scares away a lot of people, and that's good. It's a good filter. If we talk to somebody about this and they're not kind of grossed out, then they'll probably be a good fit. And that's kind of how we approach it. So the other ones are just, ownership, responsibility, work like a team. Mistakes are okay. We're never going to fire somebody for making a mistake. We got fired from MailChimp hundreds of times, if that was the case. Minimizing cognitive load and lightweight processes. So we try to add process. We try to add just enough process to keep people from feeling confused and uncertain of what they should be working on. Anything more than that, it gets dangerous. And it's a constant balance. We'll figure it out and then we'll hire another 30 people, and then it doesn't work anymore, and then we got to figure it out again. So it's constant, but that makes it fun. And then this is MailChimp stats today. So now we send at least 1 billion a day. On a busy day, we'll send 2 billion. And that's a ton of email. We send a whole lot. It's some low single-digit percentage of email that is coming from our servers. I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. We do 720,000 database queries a second across our MySQL infrastructure. That's a good bit. That's more than most companies do. Our infrastructure is pretty large. I'll talk about that a little more. We kind of have this friendly, this monkey logo and this really fun brand, but under the hood, it's really interesting engineering. And then on the customer-facing side of our app, we get about 15,000 requests a second. So that's how many people are using the app or looking at our pages, which is a good bit. What's interesting about MailChimp is the load's actually flipped opposite of most companies. So we get a good bit of load in and then a ton of load out from all the email we're sending. And then we have a couple thousand servers. There's 300 people in the engineering. It's actually like 330 now in engineering. And we do 80 code deploys a day to our app, which is pretty nice. And the other thing we do is we do no deploys on the weekends, which is pretty important to me. We're not always able to pull that off, but we always noted on Monday if we made it through the weekend with no activity, because the balance piece is super important to us. And MailChimp's built to be a long-term company, and we can't do that if we're burning out the people that are working there. And then, I'm happy to dig into this more. This might not be interesting at all, but I was going to talk about our infrastructure just a tiny little bit. So MailChimp is a pretty big app, thousands of servers. We use a couple different data centers in Atlanta. Swanee, is northeast Atlanta, and then the other data centers in West Midtown. And we have a site in Seattle. And then we use, I talk about this because I just think it's interesting to share with people how fragile the internet is. But we use these things called carrier hotels. So 56 Marietta is one of them. It's a building in Atlanta that's just at that address, 56 Marietta, Atlanta, Georgia. Looks like a regular building, but like the whole internet for the southeast United States goes through that building. And if it goes down, the internet's down. So I just think that's really cool. And it looks normal until you go inside, and then there's a steel wall and a guard, and you're somewhere different. But it's literally a building where there's a room where you buy a rack, and then every other company, big company or carrier or internet provider you've heard of buys a rack, and you hand each other cables to connect your equipment. And that's how the internet works. And the cables are literally strands of glass wrapped in a little bit of plastic that a shovel can break. So that's how it all works, which is super fascinating to me. But we do a ton of volume. So the other thing about these carrier hotels, everyone's in there. Google, Microsoft, Akamai, all of our big partners. So a lot of our connectivity is in those sorts of buildings. So if you use MailChimp to send a newsletter to a bunch of Gmail subscribers, that just goes down the hallway in this building. It doesn't go over the internet. And so I think that's pretty neat. So we do a lot of peering, private exchanges, and direct to other companies. And we actually had one, I was joking about a shovel, but there was one time where they were building a retaining wall for the Beltline, and a backhoe went into the ground and hit this big fiber bundle, like a 144 fiber strand bundle, and knocked all connectivity out of that Swanee data center. And we had just brought up this little line right here was a piece of dark fiber that we paid for that goes straight from site to site, does not go through a carrier hotel. And it's really neat because our networking team reconfigured everything and re-advertised our IP space through the Atlanta site and was able to proxy the whole Swanee site through the Atlanta site, and we were back up in like 30 minutes. It was really cool. And so this is my joke slide about what it's like to run a service like MailChimp on the internet. It's we have this friendly monkey, friendly brand, just constantly being attacked. DDoS attacks. We get probably 3 or 4 DDoS attacks a week. We get scanned nonstop. Botnets. There's botnets in Russia and China that we know about and have know well enough that we identify them. It's just constant, and I just think that's fascinating that we have to pay for all of these layers of protection to run this friendly brand that helps small businesses. But I mentioned some of this just to kind of, I think, I said it's scary, but I actually think this is really fun and fascinating. Like, there's so many different opportunities out there and so much stuff that we can still make better. That's pretty cool. And then some lessons learned. So these are kind of just my takeaways. I say these words to teammates all the time. So I want to walk through them a little bit. But the first one is assuming positive intent is such a big deal. And I feel like, if you feel like you have been slighted or excluded from a meeting you should have been in or not included in a decision that was made, if you take this approach and assume they probably just made a mistake, because people make mistakes, this is so helpful. Because I have seen people come into a company and not make that assumption, and over time they get to this sort of like bitter and betrayed feeling place, and it's that's just not true, and you get to a point where you can't help them see otherwise. And so this is a big part of kind of just my approach to things. And every once in a while someone won't have positive intent and it'll burn you, and that's okay, because it's not going to happen very often. And that's just a super big deal to me. So I say this all the time. Someone's frustrated because they heard there was a meeting where such and such was talked about and I wasn't there. And I'm like, they probably just forgot. Go ask them about it. I'm sure they'll tell you. And they usually do. So, and then the other one I like to talk about is communication skills, especially written communication, because I feel like, I'm an engineer. I feel like written communication skills were more important to advancing as an engineer than the engineering skills were. In the workplace, it's email, Slack, social media. There's a lot that happens, and it's written, right? And written communication, it's super frequent. It's easy and fast, but it's so easy to offend somebody because there's no context, right? People cannot read into your intent and where you were coming from when you started typing a message. And so, I've had engineers that someone will ask them if something's a good idea, and they'll just write back, no. And to them, they don't even realize a bad exchange has happened. They're like, what do you mean? I answered the question, and I was trying to be helpful. And I was like, no, you have to, comma, have you thought about it this way? Or what if this happened? It's so important, because you have to, you don't want to be paralyzed by it, but when you send a message, you have to assume there's people reading it who are not going to assume positive intent, and try to soften it, hedge it, be collaborative. So it's a big deal. Focus on the customer is a big deal. That's why I like MailChimp so much. Be an ally. Like, you never know who you're going to work with in the future, or even within your company, like whose help you're going to need, who you'll need to collaborate with. And if you make a habit of helping people when they ask for help, it pays off big time. And it'll also help correct. So the first one's obviously the one I linger on the most, but if people start assuming you don't have good intent in your actions, if you've been an ally to everybody else in your company, they'll correct that for you. You don't have to do it anymore. People can't come at you and say, well, Joe's being a jerk because there's this meeting he did where he didn't ask for my input. And that whoever they say that to, because I take this approach, they'll defend me for me. I don't even have to do it. And they'll correct it there. Don't burn bridges. If you leave a job, it's a super bad idea. You know, you never know who you're going to cross paths with again. Careers tend to, especially if you stay in a particular area. I've been in Atlanta for a long time. You'll cross paths a bunch. And then owning your work is a big thing for me. So just, you know, owning what you're doing, take responsibility for it. If you mess up, fess up. I remember I had an internship at a tech company that did like back office restaurant software, and I was working on I was migrating a big piece of software from Microsoft Access, which people used to use to build software, and it would come out really weird, to .NET. And I flipped the pointer, I flipped where the software was looking for its database on the wrong machine, the machine I thought was mine to play with. And then I came in the next day, and everyone's freaked out, and tech support is like in tears. All their tickets have jumped back in time because I pointed the production system at like a 3-month-old snapshot of the production system, and they're like, these are tickets I closed, and they were like, who did this? And I, you know, I had to raise my hand, and I did it, and they let me, you know, I got to keep my internship, and I dug out of it, and it ended up being a really good experience for me, and I got, you know, recommendations from that person later, and I just think that that's a good philosophy to have. And so that's, I think, all I've got, but I'm happy to answer questions about anything people would like to ask. Yeah?
Does MailChimp have local workshops in order to like know the different things that building an email can do? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so she asked if we have local workshops to help people see like how to use our software. And we don't do that right now. It's something that we've talked about. We lean on agencies to do that a bit. The problem is I can't like readily give you the name of an agency, but I could do it later. I could connect you to a group in town that does that. A lot of our software is so we have something like, you know, some number of millions of customers, right? And our support team is only about 200 people, and so a lot of our front line of support is our knowledge base and such is pretty solid now, and we're trying to make it better and better. So we'd like that to get to a point where you could go there and get answers to your questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking basically from a financial aspect, you said you guys are pretty much a liquid company, like really liquid. What's the opposition to getting your D&B profile and your credit profile built? Right?
The opposition to it? There was no opposition, just like, oh shoot, we never did that kind of thing. I actually don't think we do still. But it's no, you know, if you're gonna start a company, like you should, Dun & Bradstreet's, like if you don't have a Dun & Bradstreet profile, you don't have credit as a business. So it's super bad advice. Like it's definitely not advice that you should not do that. We just never have, and now we have a brand and references and such that we haven't run into trouble.
So you guys foresee building that profile in the future? Because in the event that you guys do expand even further than you guys have expanded so far,
Yeah.
what would be the outcome? You guys gonna consistently utilize your liquid and tie up that liquidity in your company, or?
So we're pretty unusual. So our profits are, we do a lot of cool things for employees, and then the rest of it gets saved or invested. And so we build a war chest that is, there's probably more we could do with it. I'd mentioned we're actually starting to build a corporate development group to try to, leverage those assets a little bit better, to look at acquisitions, investments. And so it's just a matter of time before we set that up. And I actually could be wrong. It may be there now. I mean, it hasn't been a pain point yet. Yeah. But it's bad. It's probably a bad idea in general, though. I think he had his up first there.
Do you believe that being completely private, not having any debt, was the main contributor to you guys being net positive, like revenue-wise?
Yeah, I think it was a big part of it. And there's lots of ways to build companies. I think if you ask our founders, there was a lot of luck involved in the way MailChimp came together. I don't ever, all the companies that I started, we raised money. We did it the normal way. So what people don't realize about MailChimp is the company's actually about 18 years old. And the first 8 years, it was a company called the Rocket Science Group. And they were a web development kind of consulting contracting company. And they built MailChimp as a side project to help their customers. And then it started to gain traction. And so about 10 years ago, they killed the consulting business and just went all in on the product. And so that's partly why they were able to bootstrap, is they had that consulting work ahead of the product work, and were able to kind of run them in parallel until the other one looked promising. Yeah.
How do I actually get involved in everything to do with the start of a business?
Yeah, I mean, there's I'm trying to think if there's a great first place to go. I think the best place to start would be to look up one of the groups in town that focuses on incubating or advising or helping people start companies. So two of them are Georgia Tech has the ATDC. That is it's a incubator built into that school where they provide office space and some initial funding. And what they do is they do events. So they'll do an event where the startups will pitch their product, or they'll get advice from advisors, or they'll have an investor come in and give advice. And that can be a good way to get exposure to what all's out there and figure out what direction you want to go.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. I think, yeah.
What is some of your customer base, and is it global?
Yeah, so our customer base is actually 49% international. And it's interesting because we haven't done anything. We don't market outside of the US. The app is only in English. We do have features. So our customers, we did build localization features into the product. So our customers have to use our product, which is only in English, but they can completely localize the experience that their subscribers are getting. And I take that back. We've done a little bit. We've done a lot of work to accept different currencies. And that'll probably be a focus in the next year or two is to hey, what if we double down on some of these countries where our usage is really high?
Well, I'm going to go to the other side.
Okay.
So, well, I think that that humility was something you talked about, and you just said, well, we haven't done very much, but it sounds like you've done, is that part of the story here? So it sounds like you've done quite a lot. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.